Coming up this Sunday at 7 p.m. at the Fort Garry Hotel, Jazz Winnipeg is presenting two true legends of folk music. Cathy Fink and Marcy Marxer are virtuoso multi-instrumentalists who have been performing together for more than 40 years. And in the process, they have been nominated for 14 Grammys, won 2 Grammys, and have performed with the likes of Pete Seger, Tom Paxton, and Patsy Montana, amongst many others. They performed at hundreds of folk, bluegrass, and country festivals, and their work as children's songwriters and performers have won them accolades from far and wide. As ambassadors of Americana music, they have gone on to teach the next generation of folk musicians, most notably guitarist and composer Kaki King and the composer and singer Rhiannon Giddens. And I could go on and on. The show on Sunday at the Fort Garry Hotel will be a mixture of classic country, western swing, bluegrass, and some gypsy jazz thrown in for good measure. This is going to be a really fantastic show. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about Sunday's concert at the Fort Garry, it is my privilege to have the opportunity to talk with Cathy Fink and Marcy Marxer. Hello, Cathy and Marcy. So great to meet you here over Zoom.
Howdy, it's great
Yeah,
to be here.
great to meet you.
Mhm. I first want to start out by getting to know you. Uh, Cathy, you were born in Maryland, and Marcy, you were born in Michigan, or from Michigan. When I was prepping for the interview, one of the things I realized is that Canada played a big part in both of your careers. Cathy, you were a student at McGill. Can you talk about that? And can you also talk about sort of the coffee house tradition that was going on in Montreal at that time in the early 70s?
Sure, that coffee house tradition was part of what interested me in going to McGill University. I thought, why not go to school and sort of explore this whole folk music thing that I was so interested in? And we were kind of at the end of what we'd call the early 60s folk scare. But there was a vibrant coffee house scene, and the Yellow Door Coffee House is still up and running. And I just started participating in it. I went to all the open mics. I eventually got my own gigs. And after a year at McGill, I decided to try my hand at being a full-time folk singer. And I thought, well, I'll give it a year and we'll see what happens. And here I am now, well over 50 years later.
And my understanding, we were talking about this off air. I didn't know this, but you moved from Montreal to Winnipeg. Is that right?
I did. My former partner, a fellow by the name of Duck Donald, and I hitchhiked our way across Canada with our instruments. We played house concerts everywhere. And the house concert hosts in Winnipeg said, we're going to have a folk festival here. This was like March or something. And you should audition for it. And they literally took us over to Mitch Podalik's house, who instigated the Winnipeg Folk Festival, and we sat there in his living room and auditioned. And he then said, well, if you join the union, I'll hire you. And we joined the union, the musicians union in Winnipeg. I'm still a union member all these years later of a local called Local 1000, which is non-geographic and includes both Canadian and US members. And from there, we continued touring, but came back for the festival. I turned 21 at the first Winnipeg Folk Festival. And since then, I lived there until 79, moved back to the States, but have continuously returned to Canada. And then in the meantime, in 1980,
Mhm.
literally right after moving back to the States, I played at one of Mitch's festivals in Toronto, Ontario. And that's where I met Marcy. She was in an all-female string band called the Bosom Buddies String Band. And we were in a whole bunch of workshops together. And I became friends with her band. We became friends with each other. We ended up, within a couple of years, becoming a full-time duo.
And Marcy, what was it like for you meeting Cathy in Toronto and knowing that? Did you know at the time this is going to be the person you're going to spend the rest of your career performing with?
No, I didn't. It took us both a while to figure that out, but we became fast friends, which was great. And before that festival, my old time string band was playing around Michigan, around the Midwest. We did Prairie Home Companion, those kinds of shows, which was great. But Stan Rogers, Canadian legend, came to
Mhm.
one of our shows. And he loved us, and he invited the four of us, scruffy girls, to his house. And he said, each of you bring a pack of 3x5 cards and a pencil. So we did. I mean, we were just over the river. Um, it's easy. My family used to vacation in Canada. It took us like 20 minutes to get there.
Mhm.
And so we did sit down, and Stan gave us a whole bunch of gig connections and said, talk to this person, talk to that person, charge them this much, tell them I sent you. And within a very short time, he had booked us across all the major folk festivals in Canada.
Oh, wow.
And meeting Cathy was, it was really like, I think we didn't hit it off right at first because we didn't know each other yet. We were so busy doing workshops and things, but I really appreciated her music, and I thought she sang gorgeously, this big, deep voice.
Mhm.
She could really hold an audience. She was obviously a seasoned performer, and we had a great time playing music together.
Yeah, and we ended up jamming a lot at that first festival, jamming late into the evening, and
Wow.
that kind of cemented our mutual love of multiple styles of music. And here we are in 44 years later,
Mhm.
53 albums later, and,
Yeah,
millions
yeah.
of miles of touring.
Yeah, yeah. And it sort of brings me, your catalog is so vast. You do so many things so well. I watched, when I was prepping for the interview, I watched the interview that the two of you did with the Library of Congress. And one of the things that came up as a radio guy, I clicked into it, was how different radio was back in the 50s and 60s. You could hear classical, you could hear folk, you could hear jazz, all on the same station. Is that one of the reasons that the two of you got to know so much music and be able to perform it so well?
I think that's part of it. We both grew up with that classic radio station that would play Motown, and then they'd play Bob Dylan, and then they'd play the Weavers and Pete Seeger, and then they'd play Roger Miller. And there were no slices of the pie that were dedicated to specific
Right.
radio stations. And in a way, I feel like that gave us such a broad musical education. What it did at the same time, of course, there were plenty of gatekeepers, more gatekeepers, and in some ways, you heard less music.
Mm,
But I think we both enjoyed that. And then for both of us, as we got more and more involved in folk and country and what people now call Americana, one thing leads to another, right? So old time country music led me to Western swing. They're very tied together. Western swing led me to Django Reinhardt and to other jazz classics. And old time country music led us both to classic country music. Everything's so interrelated that I find it a bit sad that radio's become so
yeah,
specific per channel.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
really, my experience with the Canadian folk festivals was mind-blowing because they were so musically diverse. It was absolutely incredible. You could hear acts from around the world. I mean, I had no idea that playing my first Canadian folk festivals would actually change my life in terms of music and my life partner.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And Marcy, one of the things I learned about you is you'd actually started out as a career as an actor and studied at a clown college. Does does that part of your background make its way on the stage when you perform with Kathy?
Yes, it does. I played music since I was a little kid, but I didn't know that people played this kind of folk music really, that my family and friends were playing for a living. I just had no idea how to bridge that gap. But I went to school at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts for theater after high school, and in between summers at high school, I went to the clown school. And it really came into play. For one, I was very shy until I did that. And also is very handy in being on stage and working for kids,
Yeah,
doing kids audiences. That was invaluable experience.
Yeah,
mhm,
Marcy's quite a ham in the children's
yeah,
concert and family concert scenarios, but I think the dramatic experience has always panned out because with our music, we're both also storytellers. Like you
Mhm.
earlier, you mentioned Patsy Montana, and she was the first woman in country music to sell 1 million records. A great song called I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart, a yodeler. We both became friends with Patsy Montana. We toured with her and performed with her. We produced her last album. And so when we do a Patsy Montana song, we tell stories about Patsy. We're storytellers.
Right.
And it's the stories that connect all of this music and how we became involved in it and the heroes and heroines behind it. And so I think Marcy's training in that has really been a great advantage.
Mhm. Speaking of heroes and heroines, uh, we're going to talk about the concert in just a second, but I have to mention Ella Jenkins.
Ah,
I know who she is because I have friends who teach elementary music education. Um, you've got this album out, Celebration, a tribute to Ella Jenkins. Why is she so important to you, and why is playing music for children so important for the both of you?
I actually both of us started playing music for kids long before we even met,
Mm,
before we turned 20. And in my case, it sort of grew amongst other things while I was at McGill. I worked at local daycare centers as a substitute teacher, and the word got around, bring in that substitute teacher with the guitar and she'll sing with the kids. Next thing you know, the Girl Scouts invited me. Next thing you know, some other club invited me. Next thing you know, a school invited me. And it was a very natural extension of who I am. In both of our cases, Marcy and I think of ourselves sometimes as social music conductors.
mhm,
The other thing that's important to us is it's very important to us that kids hear music other than what they hear on the radio, that they hear heritage, that they hear um, the links in the chain, so to
mhm.
speak, and that they also see this as a possibility for them. How can music enrich their lives? And I know, for instance, in Manitoba, there's so much going on bringing kids into the tradition of fiddle playing, and we have a lot of friends involved in that in
Mhm.
Manitoba. So back to Ella Jenkins, she just turned 100. We flew to
Mhm.
Chicago for her 100th birthday. But Ella is known as the first lady of children's music. And as you mentioned, you can't walk into an elementary school or preschool classroom and not have Ella Jenkins albums, cassettes, CDs, the whole thing. And for many years, that was almost all there was. And she and Mo Ash of Folkways Recordings had the foresight to understand that there was a need for this and therefore a marketplace in the educational world. I would say that careers like Raffi and Fred Penner,
Mhm.
that door was opened for them by Ella Jenkins.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that's still a very important thing to us. We really appreciate the opportunity to get kids excited about music and to understand how it can enhance their lives.
Yeah, and you're sort of preaching to the choir. I mean, I was born in 74, and I describe myself very often to my friends as a Sesame Street kid. I was raised on Sesame Street, and here in Canada, we had a wonderful show called Mr. Dress Up that starred one guy, Ernie Coombs. And the show was him dressing up and singing songs, and songs like from different styles. And we got that in Sesame Street as well. So for me, growing up as a child, it was, yeah, it just had exposure to children's music and different kinds that was so valuable. Hmm.
that's wonderful.
I want to turn to the show on Sunday. As I said earlier, your catalog is so vast. You do so many things and play so many styles so well. What can audiences expect at the Fort Garry on Sunday night?
It's going to be an eclectic night. We will have five-string banjo. Marcy's like the secret sauce here. Like you mentioned, our new show that is not coming to Winnipeg yet, called From China to Appalachia. One of the
Mhm.
centerpieces of what Marcy does is play cello banjo. It's a four-string banjo tuned like a cello that goes back to the early 1900s. But she is a virtuoso musician on guitar, on mandolin, on ukulele, on cello, banjo, on so many other things. I'll mostly stick with guitar and five-string banjo. So the eclectic evening is going to include some jazz classics. Daniel Kulak is going to play some bass with us, which we're
Oh,
very excited
sweet.
about. So
Yeah.
that's another Winnipeg connection. I gave Daniel a handful of banjo lessons when he was 12 years old.
Huh.
And of course, at the time I was 22, and it seemed like, he's a kid, I'm an adult. Well, hey, here we are all these years later, and we're just good friends, and his whole family are friends, and his daughter and son are friends, and now he's got a granddaughter that we can't wait to meet. And Daniel's an amazing musician. So he's going to do some songs with us. We're going to do some old time country music, some Western swing, some swing and jazz. We also write a lot of songs, so there'll be a bunch of original material in there. We're absolutely showing up with our ukuleles, and so it's going to be an eclectic evening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Any Django?
There's there's a Django piece, and there's also a song that I wrote in honor of Marcy, who's one of the few. There's a few more now, but she's one of the handful of women who play lead guitar in Django Reinhardt's style. So there's a song we recorded a few years ago called "Girl Django," and that's going to be in there too.
Yeah, I've heard it. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. When I think of the both of you, one of the things that I sort of liken you to is in the East Coast, there's this wonderful thing that they have called kitchen parties, and as the name suggests, everybody gathers in the kitchen. It's where you go, and a couple people break out instruments, and they takes it from there. Very often turns into a sing along. Is there going to be any singing along on Sunday night with the
Oh,
two of you?
absolutely. Absolutely. We invite the audience in on a handful of things. And we not only have our own kitchen parties here, but I think a few are scheduled for our visit time in Winnipeg, and we're looking forward to that.
That's fantastic. Um, I'm going to wrap up the conversation by asking, uh, what are you hoping that audiences will walk away with after seeing Sunday night's performance?
Ooh, you
Hmm.
ask the tricky questions, don't you?
Hmm.
Music is one of the things that really connects us. And I think that's the bottom line for us is that music is about connection. And that's what we hope for. We of course hope to see lots of old friends. Neither of us have been to Winnipeg in a long time. And the impetus behind this was Daniel and a couple of other friends going, we haven't seen Cathy and Marcy in a long time. Let's get a weekend together so we can all play some music and be with our friends. And um, it's been 44 years, 45 years since I lived in Winnipeg, but it's still very near and dear to my heart. Every time we cross the border, I feel like I'm going home. And um, I love that feeling. And we love the feeling of having a group in a room that feels connected because we're in this music together.
Oh wow. And
That's,
Marcy, how about you?
I would say that too. I feel kindred spirits in Winnipeg. We've done shows there before. We've hung out with friends. We've done the festivals. But it feels like home to me also.
Oh,
Not
wow.
so dissimilar to Upper Michigan, but the only thing is you need a couple more layers of clothing just in
Well,
case.
Yeah,
I
how
don't.
cold is it right now?
It's beautiful. We're enjoying a wonderful warm autumn. It'll be last time I checked on Environment Canada, it was I think 13 or 14 degrees for Celsius
Yeah.
for the weekend. So it should be just great weather. Yeah,
Awesome.
Well, we're looking
right.
forward to it. Winnipeg is beautiful, and we love the people, so we can't wait.
I look forward to seeing it. Cathy and Marcy, this has been a real thrill to meet the both of you and talk to you. My wife and I are for sure going on Sunday, and we're both really excited. Can't wait to see you both perform in person. All the best, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. This has just been really fantastic.
Thank you. You're,
Yes.
you're making us look forward to the trip even more.
Thanks.